My husband's Rolex was the only thing I had left of him. When I couldn't find it, my son said, "Stop whining, it's already sold." I needed that money for my trip. When I called the pawn shop to try to get it back, they said, "Ma'am, you need to see what we found inside the watch." Marianne adjusted the curtains to let in the soft morning light that spilled gently across the wooden floor of her quiet home in Denver, Colorado. At 62, she had grown used to the silence that followed her around each day, a silence that settled in after Daniel's death, 2 years earlier, and had since become a reluctant companion. Retirement from her job as a literature teacher had come around the same time, and though her days were slower now, they were still full of routines she held onto like fragile lifelines. Watering the garden, feeding the birds, dusting the old books in the study, and, once a week, opening the velvet-lined wooden box on her nightstand to check on Daniel's Rolex. It wasn't just a watch. It had never been just a watch. Daniel had worn it every single day of their 41-year marriage, from their wedding day to his final hospital stay. A silver vintage Rolex with a deep blue face and a small scratch on the clasp he used to joke about, "Proof I'm human," he would say. He never let anyone else wind it. He called it his timekeeper, but Marianne knew better. It was the only luxury he'd ever allowed himself, a gift from her on their wedding day, paid for in monthly installments and youthful hope. He never took it off, not even when the doctors told him there was nothing more they could do. When he passed, the Rolex was returned to her in a small plastic pouch, cold and lifeless. But she had it cleaned, restored, and placed it in the box he had made in his woodworking phase. It was the one item she protected above all else, more precious than any photograph or letter. Because it carried him, his scent, his warmth, his touch. That morning, as she moved to retrieve the watch for its weekly polish, her heart skipped in confusion. The box was slightly ajar. She paused, frowning. It was always shut. Always. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it fully. The watch was not there. She froze. A chill crept through her spine, slow and paralyzing. She lifted the box, checked underneath, pulled out the drawer where she sometimes tucked away small trinkets. Nothing. She stepped back, as if distance would reveal a mistake, some trick of the eye. But the space where the Rolex should have been was empty. A tightness coiled in her chest. Her eyes scanned the room, the dresser, the jewelry box, the top of the nightstand, her breath growing uneven. She remembered clearly putting it back 6 days ago, right after polishing the face with the soft cloth she kept for that purpose. She never moved it. Never. She searched the entire bedroom, then the guest room, then the living room, though she already knew what the outcome would be. It was gone. She leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the edge with both hands, trying not to cry. The loss hit her like a fresh wave of grief, sharp and merciless. Her mind immediately turned to Caleb. He was 24, bright, but directionless, a young man trying to find himself through failed college majors and changing ambitions. He was her only child, and she loved him with a mother's stubborn heart, but lately, he had been distant, irritable, and often careless with her things. He had been in and out of the house over the past week, supposedly packing for a trip with friends to California. There had been tension between them, over money, over responsibility, over the feeling that he was always searching for the next escape. She didn't want to accuse him without certainty. But deep down, something in her already knew. She found him in the garage, tossing a surfboard into the back of his friend's SUV, his expression bright and distracted. He turned when she called his name, but the smile faded when he saw her face. "Where's your father's watch?" she asked, her voice low, almost breaking. He blinked, confused. Then, casually, as if discussing the weather, he shrugged. "Stop whining. It's already sold. I needed that money for my trip." Marianne didn't answer. She couldn't. Her ears rang. Her knees weakened, and she had to hold on to the edge of the garage wall. Caleb had already turned away, pulling out his phone, chatting with his friends. She could barely hear him anymore over the sound of her own pulse. It was as if Daniel had died all over again. But this time, someone had chosen to bury him. She walked back inside, numb, her hands trembling. Minutes passed before she could reach for her phone and start calling pawn shops across the city. Her voice cracked as she described the Rolex. A silver face, she repeated again and again, with a blue dial and a scratch on the clasp. Each time she hoped for a miracle. Each time she felt the ache grow deeper. Until the fourth call, when a woman answered, listened in silence, and then said something that made Marianne stop breathing. "Ma'am," the woman said, her voice suddenly cautious, "I believe we have it. But, you need to come here. There's something inside the watch. Something you need to see." The silence in the living room felt heavier than ever as Marianne stood by the window, watching her son's car disappear down the street. The sound of the tires fading was like a final nail driven into something she hadn't realized was already cracking. Her hand still trembled around the cordless phone, though the line had gone dead minutes ago. The woman at the pawn shop had been brief, but her tone was unmistakable, serious, urgent, even afraid. Whatever they had found inside the Rolex, it was something they weren't willing to discuss over the phone. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter like glass, then turned her gaze to the hallway. Caleb's bedroom door was half open. She hadn't dared to enter it in weeks, not out of fear, but from a desire to maintain boundaries. She'd given him space, allowed him the freedom to come and go, hoping it would encourage him to find his footing. Now, all she could feel was the sting of betrayal. Still, with her breath uneven, she stepped across the threshold. The room was a mess. A mixture of laundry, electronics, and half-packed bags cluttered every surface. Empty cans and snack wrappers were scattered across the desk, alongside an open laptop that blinked sleepily. She didn't want to touch anything. It felt invasive, but the ache inside her chest pushed her forward. She wasn't looking for the watch, that was already gone. But perhaps, some trace of his decision, something to explain how the son she raised could so carelessly discard a piece of his father. There was a receipt on the nightstand. Folded in half, thin paper with a logo she didn't recognize. She picked it up. It was from a gas station, one across town, dated 2 days ago, the same day the pawn shop said the Rolex had been sold. A time was listed, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Caleb had told her he'd been at a friend's house studying that day. She closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the lie. When she opened them again, her fingers were curled so tightly around the paper that it tore slightly at the edge. She found more receipts in the drawer. Liquor stores, restaurants, even a receipt for a surfboard rental, already preparing for the California trip. All of it paid in cash. Not a credit card in sight. Her mind began piecing things together faster than her heart could keep up. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed into a blue-gray haze, she tried to eat but couldn't get past the first spoonful of soup. The television flickered in the background with a program she wasn't watching. She stared instead at the small wooden box where the Rolex used to rest. She had moved it to the coffee table, placing it in front of her like a question waiting for an answer. The memory of Caleb's words echoed like a slap. "Stop whining. It's already sold. I needed that money for my trip." He hadn't even tried to lie. There was no guilt in his voice. No remorse. That was what pierced the deepest. The front door opened around 8 o'clock that night. Marianne remained motionless on the couch, her eyes locked on the box, as Caleb stepped in. He was cheerful, humming something under his breath, probably music from the car. His duffel bag was slung lazily over one shoulder. He stopped short when he saw her sitting there. "Hey," he said, cautiously. "Didn't think you'd still be up." Marianne slowly turned her gaze to him. Her voice came out colder than she intended. "Sit down." Caleb blinked, clearly thrown by her tone. Why?" "Because I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling." He sat reluctantly, lowering himself into the armchair across from her. His eyes darted to the box, then back to her. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "What's this about?" he asked. "You know exactly what it's about," she replied. The Rolex. He didn't flinch. He leaned back in the chair and crossed his arms, casual again. I told you. I sold it. I needed the money. For what? He scoffed. For the trip, Mom. Flights, car rental, some gear. It's not like I was using it for drugs, if that's what you're thinking. That watch, she said, her voice tightening, was the only thing of your father's I had left. The only thing. He rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. Her heart pounded. How could you do that without even asking me? I thought you'd say no. And I needed it more than you did. You weren't wearing it. It was just sitting there like a relic. Marianne stood up, unable to contain herself any longer. It was a relic. It was a piece of your father. It meant everything to me. Well, it didn't mean anything to me, Caleb snapped. I barely remember him anymore, okay? You act like I'm supposed to cry over a watch. Marianne stared at him, stunned. He raised you. Caleb shrugged. Barely. He was always working. You're the one who did everything. So yeah, sorry if I don't feel attached to some old piece of metal. She took a breath, held it. The room felt frozen in that moment. There's more, she said finally. The pawn shop called. They found something inside the watch. Caleb's expression changed. His arms slowly uncrossed. What do you mean? I don't know yet, she said. They wouldn't tell me over the phone. But they want me to come in. He shifted in his seat. That's weird. What kind of thing? I'll find out tomorrow, she said. And if it's something important, if it turns out you sold something that didn't belong to you, with information that could put things at risk, I swear to you, Caleb, I will not protect you. His face hardened. So now you're threatening me? I'm warning you, she said, her voice calm now, icier. Because I'm not just your mother. I'm the person your father trusted to protect everything he left behind. And I failed once. I won't do it again. They stared at each other across the room. He was the first to break eye contact, standing up abruptly. Fine, he muttered. Do whatever you want. But don't act like I'm the villain here. It's just a watch. He turned and walked toward his room, slamming the door behind him. Marianne didn't move. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Her heart ached, but not just from grief anymore. It was something sharper, something closer to realization. That boy, her son, was slipping away. And she wasn't sure he even wanted to be saved. She sat back down and stared at the wooden box again. Tomorrow, she would go to the pawn shop. And whatever was waiting inside that watch, she would face it alone. The morning came with an unsettling clarity. Marianne rose before the sun had fully broken across the Denver skyline, her thoughts tangled and restless. Sleep had been shallow, more a long state of dread than rest. She had spent most of the night listening to the occasional creak of the house, trying not to think about Caleb just beyond the hallway wall, probably asleep without a trace of guilt. She hadn't heard a sound from his room since the door slammed. Not an apology. Not even the sound of footsteps. By 7 o'clock, she was dressed and ready. The quiet hum of the coffee maker filled the kitchen as she poured herself a single cup, untouched by sugar or milk. Her hand still trembled slightly when she reached for her keys. She had written down the name and address of the pawn shop the night before, scrawled in her small, looping handwriting on a sticky note now folded into her coat pocket. She drove through early traffic in silence, the radio off. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, commuters, cyclists, the occasional jogger, but inside the car, there was only the sound of tires on asphalt and the faint tick of the dashboard clock. The shop sat on a narrow street in downtown Denver, nestled between a bakery and a shoe repair store. It was older than she expected, with a weathered red awning and gold lettering that spelled out "Town and Time Pawn." The display windows were cluttered with instruments, cameras, and small electronics. She stood in front of the door for a moment before entering, drawing in a long breath to brace herself. A small bell jingled as she stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust. Behind the glass cases, a young woman looked up from a stack of paperwork. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, and a pair of glasses perched low on her nose. She froze when she saw Marianne. "You must be the woman who called yesterday," she said, straightening up. "About the Rolex?" Marianne nodded. "Yes. I'm Marianne Holloway." The woman walked out from behind the counter. Her voice lowered. "I'm Claire. I'm the one who answered the phone. Can you come with me to the back office?" Marianne followed her without a word, her pulse quickening as they passed rows of second-hand items and entered a small room at the rear of the shop. There was a desk, 2 chairs, and a safe tucked in the corner. Claire gestured for her to sit, then pulled open a drawer and removed a small velvet pouch. She placed it on the table, opening it carefully. Inside was the Rolex. Marianne stared at it. Even after what had happened, the sight of it stirred something deep in her chest. The silver caught the light exactly as it had when Daniel would hold her hand at dinner, checking the time with a quick flick of his wrist. She hadn't seen it this close since the last time she cleaned it. "It's been authenticated," Claire said softly. "It's real. And it was sold to us by a young man 2 days ago. Matches the description you gave. We buy a lot of watches, but when I opened this one to clean it for display, I found something unusual." She reached into the drawer again and pulled out a clear plastic envelope. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper, delicate and creased. She handed it to Marianne. Marianne's fingers hesitated for a second before she opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, neat, always in blue ink. Daniel's. Her vision blurred for a moment. She blinked it away and focused. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted to while I was still alive. But there are things you need to know, things I never had the courage to tell you." The words sat heavy in her chest. Claire said nothing. She sat quietly, giving Marianne the space she needed. Marianne continued reading, her hands trembling slightly. "I wasn't always honest with you about money. Years ago, I made some poor investments, lost a lot, and thought I could fix it without burdening you. Eventually, I did fix it, but by then, I had already hidden the truth too long. I set aside funds under your name, in an account you don't know about. The information is enclosed. I left it here, inside the watch, because I knew you'd take care of it. I knew you wouldn't let it disappear. At least, that's what I hoped." Marianne folded the paper, her breath caught in her throat. The letter continued on the back. She turned it over with care. "There's a key hidden inside one of my books, Leaves of Grass, the old hardcover. Inside that key is everything you need to access what I left for you. You'll find the book in my study, on the top shelf." I couldn't say all of this aloud. I didn't want you to worry. But now, I wish I had. At the bottom of the letter, just above his name, Daniel had written a single line. "I never doubted you, not for a second." Her hands tightened around the paper. A mix of anger, love, and sorrow surged all at once. How long had he carried this secret? Why didn't he trust her enough to share it? Why leave it to chance, to hide it in a watch, of all things? Claire broke the silence gently. "We didn't damage the watch when we opened it. It was just a matter of removing the back casing during cleaning. I almost didn't check inside, but something about the way it was sealed seemed off. We always inspect valuables for hidden damage or identification. That's when I found the paper. I knew it wasn't something we could ignore." "Thank you," Marianne whispered. "You didn't have to call. We see a lot of things come through here," Claire said. "But this felt personal. I'm glad you got it back." Marianne stood slowly, clutching the letter and the pouch. "I need to take this home. There's something I have to find." Claire nodded. "Of course. And, ma'am? You might want to change the locks on your bank accounts. If someone knew about what was in that watch, they might have tried to find it before you did. Marianne paused at the door. You mean the man who sold it? Claire didn't confirm, but the implication hung between them. Back in the car, Marianne sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel, her mind racing. Daniel's voice echoed in her head. The leaves of grass. The top shelf. She hadn't touched those books in years. Her house was still quiet when she returned. Caleb's door was open, but his room was empty. A note lay on the kitchen counter, scribbled on the back of a receipt. Gone for the weekend. Don't wait up. She didn't. Instead, she went to the study, climbed the step ladder to reach the top shelf, and pulled down the worn green hardcover of Leaves of Grass. The moment she flipped it open, a small brass key fell onto the floor. She picked it up carefully. It was heavier than expected, with a number etched into its side. A safety deposit box number. Her fingers closed tightly around it. Whatever Daniel had hidden, whatever he'd wanted to protect, was waiting. And she wasn't going to stop until she found it. The key felt like it weighed more than it should as Marianne clutched it in her coat pocket, her other hand gripping the steering wheel. The box number etched along its brass edge was burned into her mind, along with every word Daniel had written. The bank where they had once shared an account was only 15 minutes away, tucked in a quiet stretch of West Colfax Avenue, a place she hadn't visited in nearly a year. She drove there now with a growing tension in her chest, not fear, exactly, but the breathless pressure that came when years of silence threatened to collapse under a single decision. Inside the bank, the tiled floor gleamed under artificial lights, and the faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. A young teller directed her to the office of the vault manager, a woman in her 40s named Marcy, who glanced at the key, typed something into her system, and then looked up with a polite smile. It appears this box is registered in your name, Mrs. Holloway, she said. It hasn't been accessed in over 7 years. Marianne didn't react. She merely nodded. I'll take you down. Marcy led her through a narrow hallway, down a short set of stairs, and into the chilled vault chamber. Rows of small doors lined the walls, each marked with faded numbers. Marcy located box number 423, inserted a second key of her own, and turned the lock with a gentle click. I'll give you privacy, she said, stepping back as she slid the box onto a metal table in the center of the room. Take your time. Once the heavy door clicked shut behind her, Marianne sat down. Her hands hovered over the box for a moment before she lifted the lid. Inside, everything was arranged with meticulous care. A leather folder, worn but intact, sat atop a small bundle of aged envelopes bound with a rubber band. There was also a manila envelope marked with her full name in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Beneath it all, at the very bottom, was a photograph. She picked up the folder first and opened it. Inside were banking documents, transfer confirmations, account statements, and insurance paperwork. It didn't take long to realize what she was looking at. Daniel had created a second account under her name, separate from their joint finances, and had been quietly transferring money into it over the course of a decade. The account had never been touched. The most recent balance was substantial, far more than she had imagined. It was enough to cover years of living expenses, medical costs, or travel. It was more than enough to ensure she would never have to rely on anyone again, not even Caleb. She swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. The envelopes came next. She unwrapped them slowly. Each one was addressed to her but had never been mailed. They were dated, some as far back as 15 years ago. They ranged from full-page letters to quick notes, all in Daniel's familiar script. One in particular caught her attention. It was dated just 3 days before his final hospitalization. It read, I know I should have told you sooner, but I couldn't. Not because I didn't trust you, I always have, but because I was ashamed. I failed once, financially, and I didn't want that failure to touch you. By the time I fixed it, it felt like too much time had passed. But I see now that I was wrong. You've always been stronger than me. Braver. This money isn't an apology. It's a promise. That no matter what happens, I didn't leave you with nothing." She read it twice before setting it down. The manila envelope was heavier. Inside, she found a laminated card containing the access information to a life insurance policy she never knew existed, held with a private firm. There was a note paper clipped to the card. "If anything ever happens to me suddenly, and you find this, contact the number on the back. Ask for Jim. He'll take care of everything." She turned the card over. There was a handwritten number, no company name, just Jim. Her fingers trembled slightly as she returned the documents to the folder. But before she closed the box, she picked up the photo at the bottom. It was a picture of her and Daniel, taken in their first home. She was sitting on the front steps, holding a young Caleb on her lap. Daniel stood behind her, arms loosely around her shoulders, smiling in that relaxed, private way he always reserved for quiet moments. There was a note written on the back of the photo. "For the life we built, and the parts of it you never saw me fix." The tears came then, not loud or violent, but slow and quiet, falling in a steady rhythm down her cheeks. She sat with the photo in her lap, letting the weight of the moment settle. When she emerged from the vault, Marcy said nothing. She simply nodded and asked if Marianne wanted a copy of the access form to be printed. Marianne declined. She wanted no paper trail yet. Not until she understood exactly how deep this secret had gone. Outside, the wind had picked up. The leaves were beginning to change, and the air had that slight sharpness of early fall. She got into her car and sat for a few minutes, hands resting on the wheel, heart still processing everything. It wasn't just the money, or the secrecy. It was the realization that Daniel had tried to protect her in the only way he knew how, silently, quietly, without ever asking for recognition. Back at home, she placed the folder and envelopes in her bedroom closet, locked behind a small safe she had once used for jewelry. Then she made a call. The line rang twice before a voice picked up. "This is Jim," the man said, his tone brisk. "Yes, hello. My name is Marianne Holloway. I was told to contact you in case I found something. My husband, Daniel Holloway, left your number." There was a pause. Then the man's voice softened. "I've been waiting for this call." "You knew him?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Jim said. "Daniel was a client. And a friend. He set up a private life policy with us over a decade ago, but he left specific instructions not to contact you unless you called us first. I assume you found the envelope?" "I have. Then I can release the remaining information. But before I do, I need to ask, have you told anyone else about this yet?" "No," she said. "Only me." There was a pause again. "Good," he said. "Because someone else has already tried." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" 2 months ago, we received a request to access the policy. It was denied, of course. The documents were forged, the ID didn't match our file, and we flagged the attempt immediately. But the timing was suspicious. "Did you get a name?" "No. The person used a false identity, and we never saw them in person. But I thought you should know, it's possible someone knew about this. Someone close." She closed her eyes. Her mind went immediately to Caleb. "Thank you," she said. "Please send me what you can." "Will do," Jim replied. "And Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes?" "Your husband was one of the few who planned for the future while still living in the moment. Not many do. Whatever's in that policy, it was meant to protect you, not burden you. Remember that." The call ended. Marianne sat on the edge of the bed for a long time afterward, her fingers brushing the side of the velvet watch box still resting on her nightstand. She hadn't put the Rolex back inside yet. It lay in her drawer now, just as polished and beautiful as the last time she'd held it before everything unraveled. She thought about the hidden note, the books, the bank, the call from Jim. All the steps Daniel had taken to ensure she would be okay. All the effort he had made to keep her safe even in death. And now, the knowledge that someone, likely her own son, had tried to access it first. She turned toward the hallway, listening. The house was still empty. Caleb hadn't returned. She didn't know when he would. But she knew that when he did, nothing between them would ever be the same again. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the lace curtains in the kitchen, catching on the rim of Marianne's untouched coffee cup. She sat at the table, shoulders wrapped in a faded cardigan, her eyes fixed on the folded papers spread out in front of her. The contents of Daniel's hidden envelope, the banking documents, and the letter with Jim's contact were all there, along with a clean notepad where she'd begun scribbling names, numbers, and timelines. It looked more like an investigation than a breakfast table. And maybe that was what it had become. After her call with Jim, she had received an encrypted email containing scanned documents from Daniel's life insurance policy. It was dated 11 years ago, and the listed beneficiary was her, exclusively. No contingencies, no alternates. That alone wouldn't have surprised her. But what caught her attention was an addendum, dated just 2 weeks before Daniel's hospitalization. A handwritten supplement, legally recognized, with one line underlined. In the event of my death, my wife Mary Ann is to receive all access to policy benefits, in addition to instructions related to a private account set up in her name at Westland Bank. If, for any reason, this is contested or tampered with, refer to Document B, attached. Document B had arrived separately, scanned, password protected, and annotated in Daniel's handwriting. It was, in every meaningful way, an informal will. Not filed in court, not notarized, but created with precision and purpose. In it, Daniel detailed not just the life insurance, but a list of other items, personal belongings, investment portfolios, and a startling note about Caleb. To my son Caleb, I leave nothing of financial value until such time that he proves capable of responsibility and personal accountability. My intention is not to punish him, but to protect what I've built from his impulse and instability. If he meets the criteria I've outlined in the sealed letter to Mary Ann, then she will decide what, if anything, he inherits. Mary Ann's breath had caught in her throat when she read it. A sealed letter. She hadn't seen any such thing in the box, but she hadn't looked through every envelope. Now, she turned her attention back to the pile of letters. She sifted through them, one by one, until she found it, a thick envelope, heavier than the others, marked only with her name and the word private. Her fingers lingered at the flap before opening it. Inside was a typed document, clipped neatly, and a separate handwritten page. The typed document was Daniel's outline, his plan for Caleb. It listed 5 criteria: complete a higher education program or stable employment for over a year, show no record of criminal behavior or fraud, contribute to household expenses or personal savings, attend therapy or counseling for 6 consecutive months, and demonstrate a willingness to communicate openly with Mary Ann. If these conditions were met, Mary Ann was to determine, at her discretion, whether Caleb should receive any inheritance. Her hands trembled as she read. Not from shock, but from the weight of it. Daniel had seen the same signs. The recklessness. The entitlement. The lack of maturity that frightened her even more than his apathy. But instead of confronting it directly, he had chosen a long, posthumous handoff, placing the burden of judgment solely on her shoulders. The handwritten page was simpler, more personal. I don't blame you for being angry. I should have told you. But I also knew the look in your eyes when you worried about him. You always gave him more grace than I did. Maybe that's why I left this to you. I don't know what Caleb will become. But I trust you to see it. To know when he's ready, or if he'll ever be. Don't let guilt make that choice for you. Not this time. Mary Ann folded the paper and set it gently atop the others. Her gaze drifted to the kitchen window, where the bird feeder swayed slightly in the breeze. Daniel had built that feeder. It had been one of his quiet hobbies, like the Rolex maintenance or his meticulous filing of financial records. He had lived quietly, but deliberately. She thought again of Caleb, and of the falsified attempt to access the insurance. There was no proof yet that it had been him, but she felt the truth circling her like a hawk overhead. He was the only person who could have known about the Rolex, and the only person with reason to break into something meant for her. The puzzle was no longer whether he had tried, But why? The doorbell rang mid-morning, startling her from her thoughts. She opened it to find an envelope sitting alone on the mat. No delivery driver in sight. No return address. She glanced up and down the street but saw no one. With slow fingers, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single page, printed on cheap, white paper. Stop digging. Let the past stay buried. Her stomach tightened. She read it again, but there was no signature, no indication of who had written it. Just the message. Sharp. Threatening. She stepped back inside and locked the door. The next hour was a flurry of decisions. She scanned the letter into her computer. Then she called Jim again. I just received an anonymous threat, she told him. Someone doesn't want me looking into this. Then someone knows you're close to something, Jim said. Do you want me to involve law enforcement? Not yet, she replied. Not until I know who sent it. I'll have my office run the address for any unusual activity, he said. But be careful. If they're bold enough to threaten you, they may be desperate. She hung up and immediately called the pawn shop, asking for Claire. When she got on the line, Marianne asked a question that had haunted her since her visit. Do you have security footage from the day the watch was sold? Claire hesitated. We do. But it's stored off-site. I'd need permission from the owner to retrieve it. Can you get it? I'll try. But, is this becoming a police matter? It might, Marianne said. Please just get me that footage. She spent the rest of the day in the study, locking away all documents, setting a second password on her email, and hiding the Rolex in a safer location. Her instincts were no longer just emotional, they were defensive. Someone had tried to steal from her once. Now they were trying to scare her. That wasn't random. That was calculated. At dusk, she heard the sound of keys at the front door. Caleb stepped inside, duffel bag over his shoulder, phone in hand, earbuds dangling from his neck. His tan was deeper, and he wore a shirt from a surf shop in Santa Cruz. She watched him silently from the hallway. He paused when he saw her, sensing the shift. Hey, he said. I'm back. I see that. He walked into the kitchen, casually opened the fridge. Trip was great. We hit a bunch of beaches. Met up with Trevor's cousin. There was this bonfire. I got a letter today, she interrupted. He looked over his shoulder. What kind of letter? An anonymous threat. Someone wants me to stop looking into your father's affairs. He stiffened, just enough for her to notice. She stepped forward. Do you know anything about that? No, he said quickly. Why would I? She stared at him, watching his eyes, his posture, the way he rubbed the back of his neck. I need you to understand something, Caleb. Your father didn't leave things messy. He didn't forget me. He planned. Carefully. Quietly. And he left me in charge. In charge of what? He asked, voice rising. Everything. There was a long pause between them. And what about me? He said. Did he leave anything for me? That depends, she said. On what you've done. And what you're going to do next. She walked past him without another word, heading to her room, locking the door behind her. There would be no yelling. No confrontation. Not yet. She had the documents. She had the key. And she was going to find out exactly how deep her husband's secrets ran, even if it meant losing the only family she had left. The following afternoon, a soft knock echoed through the hallway as Marianne sat by the window, sorting documents again. She had been waiting, both anxiously and reluctantly, for any word from Claire. When she opened the door, the shop assistant stood there, clutching a slim black USB drive and wearing a look that told Marianne what she feared before either of them spoke. I didn't call because I thought it was better to come in person, Claire said, stepping inside. I got the owner's permission. We keep surveillance footage archived off-site, like I mentioned. This is from the day the Rolex was sold. Marianne took the drive in silence, her eyes never leaving Claire's. "I've already watched it," Claire said, her voice low. "I thought you should know what you're about to see before you do it." Marianne's hand tightened slightly around the USB. Claire continued, "It's definitely your son. And he wasn't alone." A breath caught in Marianne's chest. Claire opened her bag and pulled out a few still frames printed on glossy paper. She placed them on the table one by one, her fingertips brushing their corners as she slid them forward. Caleb was there, standing at the pawn shop counter, the Rolex in hand, a casual posture of someone who had done this sort of thing before. But what made Marianne's stomach twist was the man beside him. Tall. Narrow build. Slight stubble. No face she recognized. But his proximity to Caleb in each frame, the way they leaned in together, spoke of coordination. "Do you know him?" Claire asked. Marianne shook her head slowly. "No. Never seen him before." "He did most of the talking," Claire added. Caleb handed over the watch, but the other guy was the one negotiating the price. "Your son barely said a word." "Did he say his name?" "No. And we didn't ask." "That's not unusual." All the ID was in Caleb's name. He signed the form himself. Marianne stared at the photos, her fingers brushing Caleb's printed silhouette as if she might reach through the surface and shake him out of it. Claire hesitated, then spoke again. "There's something else. We ran the serial number on the Rolex for our internal records before putting it on display, which is standard. But when we did, it flagged. Not stolen, but marked as sensitive asset, linked to a flagged estate under watch by a private firm. We don't get that often. We assumed it was a probate matter." Marianne looked up sharply. "You're saying someone knew the watch might have hidden significance even before I came to you?" "Possibly. I can't say for sure. But it wasn't a random tag. It came from a system we're linked to through a third-party insurance verification database." She closed her bag. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Holloway. I really am. I don't know what's going on, but it's more than just a kid selling a family heirloom. Something's not right." Marianne nodded. "Thank you for bringing this." After Claire left, she locked the door and sat down at her desk, the drive still in her hand. She inserted it into the side of her laptop, opened the folder, and clicked play on the single video file inside. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed Caleb entering the shop, looking over his shoulder once before stepping up to the counter. The man with him kept his face turned slightly away from the camera, always at just enough of an angle to obscure a direct view. But he was directing the interaction. It was subtle, small gestures, nods, and the way he handed Caleb a folded paper just before they exited. Caleb tucked it into his back pocket. Marianne paused the footage, rewound, and zoomed in. She took a screenshot and printed the frame where Caleb held the slip of paper. She would look for it later in his room, if it still existed. The betrayal had already been bitter. But this added weight. Caleb had not just acted on impulse. He had worked with someone. Planned. Allowed another person to handle the negotiations as if the Rolex were simply a means to an end. The knowledge of what Daniel had hidden, combined with the attempt to reach the insurance firm, now pointed to something calculated, perhaps not only Caleb's idea. She didn't want to imagine what kind of influence the unknown man held over her son, but she could no longer avoid it. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills outside Denver, Caleb returned from a run. His face was flushed, and earbuds dangled from his shoulders. He entered the house without knocking, wiping his face with the hem of his shirt as he walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. Marianne watched from the hallway. "Who was he?" she asked. Caleb froze, the glass halfway to his lips. "What?" "The man you went to the pawn shop with." He turned slowly, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen the footage, Caleb." His eyes narrowed. "You've been spying on me?" "No. I've been protecting what your father left behind. That includes protecting it from you." He set the glass down hard on the counter. I needed money. That's all. You wouldn't help me. So I asked someone who could. Who is he? Just a friend. That's not just a friend. That's someone who helped you forge documents and try to steal from me. From your father's legacy. Caleb's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, she said. Tell me who he is. Why he was there. Why he was the one handling the sale while you stood by like a child waiting for instructions. He said nothing. I've contacted Jim. I know someone tried to access the insurance using false papers. And now I have a letter, anonymous, telling me to stop looking into your father's past. You think this is all coincidence? You're paranoid. I'm observant, she snapped. Something you used to be, before you decided everyone owed you something just for existing. Caleb's face twisted into something unfamiliar, anger, but also shame. You don't understand what it's like trying to make your own way while living in someone else's shadow. That's not what this is about. Yes, it is, he said, stepping forward. You talk about Dad like he was perfect. But he hid things. He lied to you. You said it yourself. He lied to protect us. To protect me. What are you doing? His shoulders dropped slightly, the fury giving way to exhaustion. I don't know. I thought there was money. A lot of it. And I figured, he owed me something. You both did. Owed you? I didn't ask to be born into expectations, he muttered. Marianne stared at him, her mouth opening slightly, then closing. She didn't know what stunned her more, the entitlement or the belief that Daniel's planning was somehow a burden. You're not a child anymore, Caleb. No, he said, I'm not. But you still treat me like one. Like I need to earn my way back into your good graces before you even see me. That's because trust isn't automatic. It's built. And you've spent the last month demolishing it, brick by brick. He turned and walked to the door. Maybe it's better if I'm not here. She didn't stop him. Not this time. After the door slammed shut, Marianne sat back down at the kitchen table. She opened the notebook again, flipped to the next blank page, and wrote 2 words in bold strokes across the top. Second betrayal. It was no longer about mourning. Or even about what Daniel left behind. It was about understanding the full extent of what Caleb was willing to do, and who might be helping him do it. Marianne spent the night not in bed, but in the study, her eyes fixed on the open notebook that now contained 6 full pages of observations, timelines, and names. The room was dimly lit by the single desk lamp Daniel used to favor, and outside, the wind pressed against the windows like a distant warning. She hadn't bothered trying to sleep. Not when every new discovery raised deeper questions. The footage, the letter, and the knowledge of the forged insurance request had changed something inside her. What started as a mother's shock was becoming something more deliberate, measured and cautious. Her grief for Daniel had become a quiet current beneath a growing determination to understand what Caleb had done and why. She was no longer simply heartbroken. She was on alert. By dawn, she had written out a sequence of events, charting Caleb's shifts in behavior, the odd withdrawals of cash, the last-minute trip to California, the unusual calls at night, the surfboard purchase, the pawn shop sale with the unknown man, the attempt to access the policy, and now, the threat letter. She noticed a pattern. It wasn't random. It had momentum. Purpose. And Marianne was certain now, Caleb had not acted alone. He was being pushed, guided, maybe even blackmailed. But the reasons behind it remained hidden. And if she didn't act soon, she feared more would be lost than just trust. That morning, she called in a favor. Helen, her closest friend from her teaching years, had a son who worked in cyber investigations for a private firm in Boulder. They hadn't spoken in years, but Helen still picked up on the second ring. Marianne? Her voice cracked slightly with surprise. It's been so long. Are you all right? No, Marianne said, her voice steady. I need help. And I need it quietly. Helen listened without interruption as Marianne explained the key details, edited carefully to leave out anything too incriminating, but enough to paint the picture: a forged document, a compromised financial trail, and a questionable acquaintance guiding her son into murky waters. Helen didn't hesitate. Send me everything. I'll call Benjamin. He owes me favors. By late afternoon, Marianne received an encrypted link and a message from Benjamin requesting access to Caleb's laptop, if it was still in the house. It was. She waited until she was sure Caleb wasn't coming home before unlocking his bedroom and stepping inside. The place was stale with the smell of sweat and old cologne. On the desk sat the laptop, closed but not powered off. She opened it, and to her relief, it was still logged in. She connected the flash drive Benjamin had sent, allowing the remote analysis tool to begin its work. The program ran silently in the background, extracting logs, saved credentials, communication histories, and recently deleted items. Marianne sat beside it, eyes on the screen, feeling like an intruder in her own home. 15 minutes later, a message popped up. Extraction complete. We'll follow up via email. B. Marianne disconnected the drive and returned it to her pocket, closing the laptop and backing out of the room. She didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, her email pinged with a message. Subject: urgent, activity of concern. Body: Mrs. Holloway. Upon preliminary analysis, I identified an encrypted folder Caleb had attempted to hide under a decoy file structure. We retrieved correspondence between him and an individual using the alias Mark. The contents are troubling. Please see attached summary. I advise caution. Attached was a PDF document outlining a series of exchanges between Caleb and Mark. The messages began innocently enough: Mark offering assistance navigating financial systems, references to unlocking what your father left behind, and vague promises about securing your future. But the tone shifted quickly. Mark instructed Caleb to retrieve the Rolex and verify its serial number. Then he coached Caleb through preparing documents to impersonate a beneficiary. Then came the most damning line, dated just 4 days before the pawn shop visit. You'll sell the watch at Town and Time. I've arranged the buyer. Once it's confirmed, you'll receive your share. Do not let your mother interfere. If she asks questions, shut her down. Marianne sat back, hands trembling. Her son had not only sold Daniel's watch. He had done so under direct instruction from someone outside the family, someone who had targeted their household and manipulated Caleb into betraying them both. The next message was worse. Failure to comply will result in full disclosure. You know what's at stake. There it was. Blackmail. She didn't yet know what disclosure meant, but it explained Caleb's recent spiral, why he'd grown distant, irritable, evasive. He was being controlled. He had gotten himself entangled in something far beyond his understanding. And now, so had she. She printed the messages and placed them in a locked drawer. An hour later, the front door creaked open. Marianne waited until Caleb dropped his bag and made his usual pass through the kitchen before calling out to him. Come here. He appeared at the doorway moments later, his face unreadable. What? Sit. He did, but reluctantly, his legs bouncing beneath the table. I need you to tell me the truth, she said. About Mark. Caleb's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. I don't know who that is. Don't lie to me. I've seen the messages. He looked down, pressing his thumb into the edge of the table. Did he threaten you? Silence. Caleb. Did he threaten you? Finally, a slight nod. He said if I didn't follow through, he'd ruin me. Said he knew things. About me. About my dad. I didn't know what he meant. Why didn't you come to me? Because you wouldn't have believed me, Caleb snapped. You always think I'm being dramatic or irresponsible. And maybe I was. But I was scared. I thought he was going to do something that would hurt us. Marianne's voice softened. What did he have on you? I don't know. He claimed he had access to files from school. Said there were disciplinary things I didn't disclose. Financial stuff. That he could leak it all, make me look like a fraud. He said if I didn't act fast, I'd lose my window to claim what was mine. What's his real name? I don't know, Caleb said. He only ever used burner accounts. I never met him in person. Only the guy who came with me to the pawn shop. That wasn't Mark. You realize what you've done? Caleb nodded, tears beginning to pool in his eyes. Marianne let the silence linger, then stood and retrieved the printed messages from the drawer. She laid them in front of him. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. But that means full cooperation. No more secrets. No more half-truths. We're going to the police, eventually, but not before I understand exactly who's trying to destroy what your father left behind. Caleb's voice cracked. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Intent doesn't matter anymore, she said. Only action. He sat there, silent and small, the pages trembling in his hands. Marianne watched him, torn between the weight of betrayal and the flicker of hope that, perhaps, he still had a path back. But it would not be an easy one. Not for either of them. The morning after the confrontation left the house in a state of suspended tension. Caleb had retreated to his room with the printed transcripts in hand, and Marianne had not heard a sound from him since. She hadn't expected resolution, not immediately, but what she had seen in his face the night before was enough to anchor her next steps. There was guilt, yes, and fear. But there was also the first real crack in his defenses. That mattered. She moved carefully through the day, knowing that each moment was a window, one that might close at any time. Mark, whoever he truly was, could reappear, escalate, push Caleb back into silence. Marianne needed leverage. Not just to protect herself, but to understand the depth of Daniel's precautions. What else had he left behind that she hadn't yet discovered? It was the sound of a book falling that brought it all back. She had been in Daniel's study again, looking through drawers for anything she might have missed, when her elbow knocked a hardcover from the shelf. It hit the ground with a muted thump. She bent to retrieve it, and as her hand brushed the floorboard beneath the shelf, she felt a slight depression, uneven, out of place. Her eyes narrowed. She set the book aside and knelt fully, pressing against the panel. It gave with a faint click. A hidden compartment. Inside, tucked into the recess behind the lower bookshelves, was a small metal box, the kind used in older filing cabinets. It was locked, but not digitally, just a simple mechanical dial. Marianne's breath quickened. She remembered something from one of Daniel's earliest letters. I hid the key inside the only place you'd never reach by accident. That wasn't the book. That was this. She turned the dial slowly, trying the same 4-digit sequence that had been etched onto the key she found in the Leaves of Grass volume. Nothing. She paused, then tried their wedding date. Still nothing. Then she remembered the last digits of the insurance policy Daniel had hidden in the watch, the final 4 of the policy code, which he had underlined in the document Jim had sent. She dialed them in. With a soft click, the box unlocked. Inside, everything was arranged with the same eerie precision she had come to expect: a small black notebook, a folded sheet of paper marked confidential, and a flash drive bound tightly with a red ribbon. She reached for the paper first. It was a letter. But unlike the others, this one wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Jim. If you're reading this, it means Marianne found the second lockbox. That's good. That means she's following the trail. Jim, I need you to understand something. I believe I've been watched. Not directly, nothing overt, but enough signs to suggest that someone has been tracking my steps. Not because of my past, but because of what I found out about the firm I invested with. Marianne's eyes scanned the words, heart racing. I made the mistake of trusting an old friend, someone who helped me build the account meant for Marianne. I discovered he wasn't operating alone. I believe Caleb may have been approached by someone connected to this man. Someone who wants access to the funds, or at least to what they think I've hidden. This flash drive contains everything. Copies of emails, spreadsheets, phone logs, and the name of the man who first approached me, Marcus Alden. I don't know if that's his real name. But it's the name he used when we signed the original documentation. Please protect Marianne. If anything happens, she will need this more than anyone else. Tell her I never stopped watching the horizon. And tell Caleb. I was trying to protect him from more than just himself. Marianne folded the paper slowly, holding it against her chest for a long moment before setting it aside. She opened the notebook next. It was Daniel's handwriting again, but this time, it wasn't personal. It was investigative. Each page listed names, dates, amounts, and cryptic references. Westfield transfer, under review. Call from MA, denied request. Caleb overheard voicemail, pretended not to know. She flipped to the final pages. One was marked with a single word. Leverage. Below it, Daniel had listed 5 entries. Private account transfer, flagged. Life insurance update, delayed 2 weeks. Rolex hiding place, confirmed. Document B status, concealed. Marianne as sole executor, finalized. She closed the notebook and stared at the drive. Her fingers moved with care as she carried it to her laptop and inserted it. The folders were numerous, but one in particular stood out, M_Alden_confidential. She clicked it open. A series of scanned documents appeared, legal forms, ID copies, contracts bearing the name Marcus Alden alongside a company Marianne had never heard of before, Everstone Capital Partners. She clicked through, reading with increasing disbelief. The company had quietly folded 5 years ago, yet Daniel had maintained a private position within one of its sub-accounts through a series of personal investments. The account was untouched. But the documents revealed something else, a clause Daniel had written into the account agreement, naming Marianne as the full successor in the event of his death, but barring any release of funds without full verification through 2 parties, her and Jim. It was airtight. Unless someone had a way to force Caleb, or forge both identities. She minimized the window and returned to the other folder, phone_logs_extracted. Inside were transcriptions of calls Daniel had recorded in his last year. One file, labeled Cal_1, caught her eye. She clicked. Daniel's voice, worn and gravelly, came through the speaker. You said you needed something from me. What is it? A second voice, male, younger, responded. Nothing major. Just. Dad, if something ever happens to you, I want to make sure Mom's taken care of. I mean, properly. Daniel paused. You think I haven't thought of that? No. I know you have. It's just. I was approached by someone who said you'd made arrangements through channels you didn't tell Mom about. Is that true? A long silence. Who approached you? Daniel asked. He said his name was Mark. Marianne paused the file, her breath caught in her throat. Caleb had known. Before Daniel died, before the watch disappeared, before the pawn shop, he had known. And he had chosen to hide it. She sat back, the full scope of the betrayal now clear. Caleb hadn't been manipulated in isolation. He had been involved from the beginning. Possibly hesitant, possibly confused, but involved nonetheless. There was no more time for patience. She locked the box, gathered the documents, and placed them all in a larger briefcase. Then she went to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Detective Garner speaking. This is Marianne Holloway, she said, voice steady. I need to report a possible financial crime. It involves forged documents, concealed assets, and the attempted theft of protected funds. I have all the evidence. I just need someone to help me bring it into the light. Garner was silent for a beat. You said, forged documents? Are you in danger? I don't know, she said. But I'm done waiting to find out. As she ended the call, she glanced at the Rolex, now resting once more in its velvet box. It gleamed beneath the lamp, silent and exact. Just like Daniel had been. Detective Garner arrived at Marianne's home just after 10 o'clock the next morning, a tall man with thinning hair and a lined face that suggested decades of quiet patience and relentless precision. He greeted her with a firm handshake and a calm, measured voice. "Let's keep this informal for now," he said, stepping into the study after she motioned him inside. "But I'll record everything with your permission." Marianne nodded, gesturing to the briefcase on the table. "Everything you need is in there, documents, audio files, correspondence. I don't know how far this goes, but I believe my son was being manipulated. And I also believe he crossed a line." Garner opened the case and began examining the folders, flipping through Daniel's handwritten notes and the summaries Marianne had printed. He moved carefully, reading with his brow furrowed, occasionally pausing to take a note in his own pad. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop and silently scrolled through its contents. When he reached the transcribed phone logs, he played the same recording Marianne had heard the night before. Daniel's voice filled the room, followed by Caleb's. Garner let it play in full before leaning back in the chair. "This is more than circumstantial," he said. "This is methodical. Whoever this Mark is, he's experienced. Structured. Probably has done this before." "I think Daniel knew it too," Marianne said. "But he never got the chance to warn me directly. He left these pieces behind like breadcrumbs. I'm just following them." Garner nodded slowly. "You mentioned someone named Marcus Alden?" She handed him a printed page with Daniel's annotations and the Everstone Capital documents. "He used that name to set up the original financial arrangement," she explained. "But Daniel suspected it was a false identity." Garner took the sheet, flipping it around to examine the signatures. "I've heard the name before," he said after a moment. "Years ago. White-collar surveillance list. Never charged, but known for slipping through the cracks. Ties to a few defunct investment groups, some shady, some just poorly managed." "So he's real?" Marianne asked. Garner nodded. "He's real. But he's a ghost now. Hasn't surfaced in years, at least not under that name. If he's involved, then this was never about your son. It was about your husband. And what he built." They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Garner asked the question Marianne had been avoiding. "Does Caleb know you've spoken to law enforcement?" "No," she said quietly. "Not yet. I don't want to scare him off. He's been distant. But I believe he's scared, not lost." "Not entirely." "Do you think he'd cooperate?" "He already gave me access to his messages once, after I confronted him. I think he would again, especially if he knew someone like Alden could come after him." Garner made a note. "We need to act carefully. If we bring him in too soon, we risk losing the trail. If Alden's still active, he won't wait around if he suspects exposure. Can you get Caleb to meet with me, discreetly?" "I can try." Later that evening, Marianne knocked on her son's door. He opened it slowly, still in the same clothes he'd worn the day before, the signs of unrest written across his face, red-rimmed eyes, sagging posture, tension in his jaw. "I need to talk to you," she said. "But I want you to understand first, I'm not here to accuse you again. I'm here because I know this is bigger than you. And I want to help you out of it." Caleb stepped back, allowing her in. She sat on the edge of his bed while he leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "I brought someone here today. A detective. Not to arrest you," she added quickly, seeing his reaction, "but to help us understand who this man is. Mark. Or Marcus. Whatever name he's using now." Caleb exhaled slowly. "You went to the police." "I went to someone I trust. And he doesn't want to make this public unless he has to. He just wants to talk. To help trace the people involved. But I need you to cooperate." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know where he is. I don't even know who he really is. Everything I got from him came through encrypted messages. We have those, she said. We've seen enough to know you weren't acting alone. But we need more. Do you remember anything else? Names? Dates? Did he ever slip and say something that didn't match his story? Caleb sat down, his hands folded tightly in his lap. There was one thing, he said. Once, when I asked him how he knew so much about Dad's finances, he got annoyed. Said it wasn't about your money. It was about something that should have stayed buried. Buried where? He didn't say. But he mentioned the name Brenner. I thought it was another contact, maybe someone who used to work with Dad. Marianne froze. She stood up abruptly and crossed the room to Daniel's old filing cabinet, which she'd moved there after clearing out the study. She flipped through the folders until she found one labeled, Consulting, 2006 to 2008. Inside were invoices from several names, most unremarkable. But one stood out. Howard Brenner. A consulting engineer. She read through the document. Brenner had been paid through Everstone Capital. Do you know what this means? She said, turning to Caleb. He shook his head. It means Daniel was working with someone inside the same firm this Marcus Alden used to run. Someone who might have turned against him. Someone who helped build the same structures they're now trying to dismantle. Caleb stood. What do we do now? I'll tell Garner, she said. And then, you and I are going to sit down with him together. We're going to tell him everything. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. The next morning, Garner returned. They met in the living room, Caleb sitting beside Marianne, visibly tense but focused. The detective asked questions gently but thoroughly. Caleb answered each one honestly, sometimes pausing to remember, sometimes struggling with shame. But he didn't retreat. Garner listened, took notes, and asked one final question. Caleb, did Mark ever ask you for physical access to anything, documents, the house, storage units, safes? Caleb nodded slowly. He asked about Dad's old desk. Wanted to know if there were hidden compartments. I told him I didn't know. Garner turned to Marianne. That's where we start next. They returned to the study. Marianne showed him the floorboard where she had found the second lockbox. Garner examined the edges, then tapped along the wall with a knuckle. A faint, hollow sound. There's more here, he said. I'll need a warrant to open this formally. But if Daniel built it, it's not random. He looked back at Marianne. Your husband wasn't just preparing for retirement. He was preparing for war. And so, another door opened, literally and figuratively. But this time, Marianne would not walk through it alone. 3 days after Detective Garner identified the hidden compartment in the wall, Marianne received a call from the manager of Westland Bank. Her appointment had been scheduled discreetly, on Garner's advice, under the guise of routine account verification. But there was nothing routine about what she was about to do. The documents Daniel had left behind, the ones tucked away in the second lockbox and sealed under layers of caution, pointed to a deposit, not just of money, but of history. A history Marianne had only begun to uncover. She arrived at the bank promptly at 9 o'clock in the morning, a gray scarf looped around her neck, the folder of authorization papers clutched tightly under one arm. Caleb sat beside her in the passenger seat during the drive but said almost nothing. Since his interview with Garner, he had spoken sparingly, mostly short acknowledgments, his mind clearly occupied with the weight of everything he had confessed. Marianne didn't press him. It wasn't time for lectures or reconciliation. It was time for action. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was sterile, professional. The branch manager, a man in his early 50s named Trevor Lang, greeted her with a clipped smile and ushered her into his office. A security guard was stationed just down the hall, and another discreetly stepped into the far corner of the room when Garner arrived minutes later. Lang closed the blinds, then offered a seat to both Marianne and Caleb before beginning. We've reviewed the policy and cross-referenced the authorization details your husband left behind, Lang said, tapping the folder in front of him. The account associated with Mr. Daniel Holloway was originally registered under a long-term investment clause through Everstone Capital's legacy accounts. As you likely know, the firm is no longer operational, but the assets were transferred to an internal holding account during the wind-down process 6 years ago. Marianne nodded, silent. Lang continued. Ordinarily, these types of accounts become inactive after a certain period. However, due to a special preservation clause and a trust-based beneficiary structure, this particular account was marked active internal hold, which means no one, not even institutional agents, could access it without dual authorization. Daniel and I, Marianne said. Correct. And since your husband's passing, that authorization defaults solely to you, unless a secondary authorization was filed. There was none. Lang leaned back, folding his hands. But we do have a record of an attempted breach 2 months ago. Marianne's breath caught. Garner straightened in his chair. Lang pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. Here's a copy of the request. It was submitted via fax to our offshore subsidiary. The sender claimed to be you. Marianne examined the paper. The signature was a crude imitation of hers. She recognized the falsity immediately, the way the loop in the "M" was exaggerated, the "A" too round. It was close, but not close enough. We flagged it and locked the account down until we could verify your identity in person, Lang explained. Do you have a time stamp? From the fax header? Garner asked. Lang nodded and turned to his assistant, who handed him a second sheet. August 22, 11:47 in the morning. That's the day I received the anonymous threat, Marianne said softly. Caleb's expression tightened. Lang slid another folder toward her. Now, as for the contents of the account itself. He opened the folder slowly. The balance totals approximately $2.3 million. Most of it in slow-growth bonds and a diversified mutual fund that's performed well over the last 7 years. There are also hard assets, bearer certificates and a privately held insurance policy that was never claimed. Marianne blinked. I had no idea, she said. He never told me the scale of it. He intended it for you, Lang said. Everything in the documents confirms that. Garner leaned forward. What about account activity prior to the breach attempt? Lang flipped to another sheet. Minimal. One outgoing transfer 5 years ago, to a third-party trust in Marianne's name. The rest has been untouched since inception. Marianne turned to Caleb. He looked stunned. Garner shifted in his seat. Now comes the part where we need to talk about the forgery. Lang nodded and opened a final folder. We traced the fax transmission to a commercial copy and print shop outside of Denver. The payment was made in cash, but surveillance footage from that location has already been requested. Garner added, we'll be cross-referencing timestamps from that footage with the pawn shop video. If the same individual appears at both locations, we'll have a strong case. If not, we widen the net. Marianne folded her hands on the table. Once we confirm the identity of the person who submitted the fake request, she said, what happens? We charge them, Garner replied. Forgery. Attempted fraud. Potential conspiracy, depending on who else was involved. Caleb shifted, guilt tightening the muscles in his jaw. Lang gently cleared his throat. There's one last item. He retrieved a small leather-bound ledger from a secure case beside his desk and passed it to Marianne. Your husband left this in the vault under your name. It's handwritten. Instructions and notes. Marianne opened it with trembling fingers. The first page was labeled. Final instructions. It was Daniel's handwriting again, elegant and precise. If you're reading this, it means you've reached the end of the trail I left. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I should have trusted you more. But I feared the legacy I built might be turned into something it was never meant to be. You've always been the conscience of this family. You were my guide in more ways than I ever admitted. Use this as you see fit. Not as an obligation, but as a tool to rebuild what may have been lost. If Caleb is with you when you read this, it means there is still hope. But you'll need to be firm. This wealth is protection, not indulgence. Don't let it poison him. Marianne closed the book gently. I'll need copies of all this, she said. But for now, let's leave the funds where they are. I'm not making decisions today. Lang nodded. Understood. Outside the bank, the air was crisp and dry, the faint scent of pine drifting on the breeze from the foothills. Caleb stood beside her, hands deep in his jacket pockets, eyes downcast. I didn't know, he murmured. How much he left. What it meant. You didn't want to know, she replied. That was the problem. He flinched but said nothing. They reached the car, but before she opened the door, she turned to him. You're coming with me to the next meeting with Garner. And after that, we're sitting down with a lawyer. We're going to get everything in writing, every condition, every boundary. Caleb looked up, eyes rimmed with regret. I'll do it, he said. Whatever it takes. Marianne opened the door. It's not just about making it right, she said. It's about not destroying what your father died trying to protect. They drove home in silence, but it wasn't the silence of before. This time, it was heavier, with knowledge, with consequence, and with the slow, uncertain possibility of redemption. After the tense meeting at the bank and the revelation of Daniel's final instructions, Marianne found herself mentally circling the same thought again and again. There were still pieces missing. Even with the evidence already in hand, even with Daniel's meticulous planning and the wealth safely secured, something didn't sit right. Marcus Alden had known too much. The forged signature, the breach attempt, the precision of the pawn shop strategy, it all suggested that someone had access to information they shouldn't have. Someone who had seen things only Daniel could have known. And that meant only one possibility remained, Daniel's laptop. The device had been stored away after his death, tucked into a drawer in the study, still in its leather case. Marianne had left it untouched, partly out of respect, partly because she hadn't believed there was anything left on it that she didn't already know. But now, everything felt different. Daniel had hidden more than money, he had hidden a quiet war with someone dangerous. And she needed to know how far it went. That night, once Caleb had gone to bed and the house was blanketed in the hush of post-confession silence, Marianne retrieved the laptop and carried it to the kitchen table. She plugged it in, booted it up, and watched as the login screen appeared with a simple password field. She didn't know the password. But she had a hunch. She tried Holloway 1977, the year they were married. Access denied. She tried Marianne 62, her birth year. Nothing. Then she remembered the phrase Daniel had left on the back of one of his letters, "Never doubted you." She typed it in, lowercase, no spaces. The screen blinked. The desktop appeared. Her breath caught. The desktop was clean, with only a few visible folders, finances, photos, writings, and a fourth one labeled simply Archive. Marianne clicked on it. Inside, there were dozens of subfolders, each labeled by date. They spanned over a decade. Most were filled with spreadsheets, letters, or scanned bank statements. But a folder from the final year of Daniel's life stood out, marked with a single word, fail-safe. Marianne opened it. Inside were 3 documents, a PDF, a Word file, and a password-protected zip folder. The PDF was titled Correspondence, Alden. She opened it first. It was a long series of emails between Daniel and someone using the address m.alden@everstonelegacy.net. Marianne scanned them quickly, realizing that Daniel had kept every exchange, even the most threatening ones. In the earliest message, Alden was courteous, referencing Daniel's past investments and inviting him to transition his funds into a new opportunity. But by the midpoint of the exchange, the tone had changed. Daniel, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. You've built something valuable. You can't protect it from everyone forever. If your family doesn't know what's at stake, that's your choice. But don't expect silence to save them. Later messages were more explicit. If you don't cooperate, others will. you're not the only one with access. Your son is asking questions. That gives us leverage. Marianne's hand froze on the trackpad. She scrolled further. In one of Daniel's replies, dated just a month before his death, he wrote, "If you come near my wife or my son again, I will hand every piece of evidence I have to the state attorney. Your name, your accounts, your manipulation. I have a backup. Several. One is in her name. Try anything, and she'll bury you." Marianne closed the file and opened the Word document. It was a personal memo, written by Daniel to himself, a journal entry more than anything. It read, "I think Caleb suspects I'm hiding something. He keeps asking questions about the insurance, the investments, and the watch. I overheard him on the phone again last night. I didn't confront him. Not yet. If Alden got to him, it's already too late to reverse it. But maybe, just maybe, I can protect him even from himself." There was no bitterness in the writing. Only resignation. A father's quiet attempt to draw a line between love and necessity. The final file was the password-protected zip folder. Marianne hesitated, then entered the same phrase, "Never dubted you." It opened. Inside were dozens of screenshots, audio clips, and surveillance images. Daniel had been tracking Alden. Several files were labeled with GPS coordinates, others with names she didn't recognize: Brenner, S. Keller, M. Linwood. Some images showed locations she couldn't place: warehouses, parking garages, industrial sites outside the city. One folder included timestamps and video captures from a private investigator's drone feed. She clicked on one file, a photo of Alden stepping out of a car and handing a manila envelope to another man, one who looked disturbingly like the man who had accompanied Caleb to the pawn shop. There was a label beneath the image: Alden to courier. Suspected info drop. Link to forged docs. Another video clip played audio from a conversation recorded in a coffee shop. Alden's voice was clearly identifiable. "I don't care what the boy thinks. He's a pawn. We only need the signature. After that, it's a cleanup job." The clip ended. Marianne stared at the screen, her mind racing. Daniel had done far more than leave a trail. He had built a case, quietly, deliberately, collecting every scrap of leverage he could find. But he had also protected it behind layers of encryption, forcing Marianne to reach each milestone before revealing the next. It was a test. Not of intelligence, but of resolve. She saved the files to a second flash drive and encrypted the copy with a new password: "Trust the watch." Then she sent an email to Garner with the subject line: "Failsafe evidence, immediate review required." An hour later, the detective called. "I've seen enough," he said. "We're elevating this. I'm sending the files to our cybercrimes unit and filing an urgent request with the State Financial Crimes Task Force." "Will they go after Alden?" Marianne asked. "If he's still operating under that name, we'll find him. But we also need to talk about that courier. The one in the image. I think he's closer than you realize." Marianne's pulse quickened. "How close?" "Possibly still in Denver. Maybe closer. I'm pulling addresses linked to his last known vehicle. You need to be careful." After the call, Marianne turned off the laptop and sat alone in the kitchen, the weight of what she had discovered pressing down on her chest. Daniel had seen it all coming. He had watched their son waver, had traced the enemy's steps, and had chosen not to confront either directly. Instead, he had left the pieces for her, not just to protect what he built, but to test if she could carry it to completion. She thought of the Rolex in its velvet case, still gleaming in the drawer upstairs. The watch hadn't just kept time. It had kept secrets. And now, with every one uncovered, the final confrontation drew closer. The morning after sending the fail-safe evidence to Detective Garner, Marianne stood in the backyard under the cold light of early autumn, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan as she watched the wind bend the dry grass. She had barely slept. Not for lack of exhaustion, but because her mind refused to rest. Every hour since unlocking Daniel's archive had been filled with a mounting sense of urgency, dread, and perhaps most unexpectedly, clarity. Everything had led here. The betrayal. The hidden messages. The forged documents. And now, the decision she alone had to make. Daniel had given her the tools, the leverage, and most importantly, the authority. But he had left the moral burden to her. Caleb's role in the breach was no longer just an emotional wound, it was a legal and ethical reckoning that could no longer be delayed. That afternoon, Garner arrived again. This time, not alone. A woman accompanied him, a sharp-eyed, poised individual with a briefcase and the kind of calm demeanor that Marianne had come to associate with people used to handling damage. Her name was Adrienne Santos, a legal counsel retained through the state's Financial Crimes Task Force. They met in the living room. Caleb sat silently on the far end of the couch, his head down, while Garner and Santos laid out the reality in slow, measured terms. Based on the evidence provided, Santos said, your son's actions meet several thresholds for criminal prosecution: attempted fraud, possession of forged documents, and potential conspiracy with an unknown party linked to financial extortion. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched as if he were waiting for the ceiling to collapse. But, she continued, because of his cooperation, his age, and the fact that no actual transfer of funds occurred due to institutional safeguards, there is room for negotiation. We're prepared to offer a pre-prosecution diversion agreement. Conditional, of course. What are the conditions? Marianne asked. Garner answered. Full cooperation. Not just testimony, but active participation in the investigation against Marcus Alden and anyone tied to him. He will be required to attend all sessions with a financial accountability counselor, submit to regular digital monitoring, and remain in the jurisdiction unless otherwise approved. And if he refuses? Santos closed the file in front of her. We proceed with charges. Marianne turned slowly to Caleb. His expression was unreadable now, his eyes distant. This is your chance, she said, not softly but not unkindly. To stop running. To stop pretending you were just a victim. You had choices. You made the wrong ones. Now you have one more. Caleb finally looked at her, and his voice, when it came, was low and ragged. I'll do it. Whatever you need me to do. I just want to make it right. Santos nodded. We'll begin processing the diversion documents this week. You'll need to attend a formal meeting with the task force coordinator within 10 days. The officials left shortly after, and the silence they left behind felt heavier than their presence had. Marianne stood by the fireplace, watching the flames crackle weakly in the hearth. Caleb remained seated, unmoving. Why didn't you tell me about Alden when he first contacted you? She asked. I didn't want you to think I was weak, he said, after a long pause. He made it sound like I was finally in control. Like I could finally claim something. Everything Dad left, it felt like it wasn't mine. Like I'd never earn it. So instead, you tried to steal it. I thought I was taking back what I deserved, he said. But it was never mine. Not really. I see that now. She crossed the room and sat down across from him. Your father wanted to believe in you, she said. Even when he suspected you were being pulled into something dangerous. He didn't expose you. He didn't cut you off. He gave me the final choice. Caleb blinked. So why didn't you turn me in? I could have, she said. Maybe I still should. But your father was trying to protect more than the money. He was trying to give you one more chance. A hard one, yes. But a real one. He didn't respond. There was nothing more to say between them in that moment. That evening, Marianne returned to the study alone. She sat at Daniel's old desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and removed a final envelope she had overlooked until now. It was labeled "If you choose mercy." Inside was a letter. If you're reading this, it means you chose not to destroy him. I don't know if that was the right choice. I don't know if I would have had the strength to make it myself. But I know you. And if you believe there's something left to save, then it's worth trying. This isn't about inheritance. It's not about punishment. It's about legacy. We don't get to choose how people remember us, not really. But we do get to decide what we leave behind. And who we leave it to. There was a second sheet, with a brief note handwritten in the margin. One last account. Not in the vault. Not in the system. Under his name. You'll find the key in the back of my copy of The Old Man and the Sea. You'll know what to do with it. She went immediately to the bookshelf, retrieved the novel, and flipped open the back cover. A small, flat brass key fell into her palm, warm from the page. There was no note attached, only a number etched on the side. It took her 2 days to locate the matching bank branch, an old credit union Daniel had used decades earlier. When she finally accessed the safe deposit box tied to the key, she found a modest account, not millions, but enough to live on for a year or more. The account was in Caleb's name. Untouched. Daniel had created it in secret, unconnected to the larger estate, with no instruction to deliver it unless Marianne made the choice to forgive. Now it sat in front of her, waiting for direction. Back home, she placed the ledger on the dining table and called Caleb into the room. He sat down across from her, warier now than before. "There's another account," she said. "In your name. Your father set it up without telling me. It's yours. But only if you agree to one thing." He looked up, confused. "What?" "You don't touch $1 of it until you complete the full diversion program. Not a single cent. You pass every condition. Every counseling session. Every review. Only then will I authorize access." He stared at her, wide-eyed. "He gave you a second chance," she said. "I'm giving you the responsibility to earn it." He nodded slowly, almost in disbelief. "Okay. I will." She handed him the ledger. He accepted it like a weight, not a gift. That night, she returned the Rolex to the velvet box, locked it in her bedroom drawer, and sat by the window overlooking the yard. The wind had calmed. The silence now felt different, not empty, but waiting. Daniel had entrusted her with the final call. She had made it. Now came the reckoning. And the rebuilding. 6 months later, Marianne sat alone in the quiet of her front porch, a linen-bound journal resting on her lap, a mug of herbal tea growing cool in her hands. The early spring air was just beginning to lose its bite, and the late morning sun filtered gently through the trees, casting speckled shadows on the porch floor. Birds chirped in the distance. For the first time in a long while, she felt still, not because the storm had passed completely, but because she had learned how to stand in its wake without being moved by it. Everything had changed, slowly and with effort. Caleb had kept his word. He had attended every counseling session, met every legal requirement of the diversion agreement, and submitted to regular digital check-ins with the state task force. Under Adrian Santos's oversight, he had even begun participating in seminars for at-risk youth, speaking, cautiously at first, about the ease with which desperation and manipulation could turn someone into an accomplice in their own undoing. He had not yet asked for access to the account Daniel left him. He had not even brought it up. And that silence, more than anything, told Marianne what she needed to know. He was no longer looking for a shortcut to purpose. Marianne herself had remained active with the investigation, meeting regularly with Detective Garner and the state attorney's office as they continued building a broader case against Marcus Alden. The files Daniel had collected proved instrumental. The data from his laptop, paired with the surveillance and documentation Marianne had uncovered, led authorities to the unraveling of a wider network of financial exploitation and fraud. Alden was never found. Not yet. But multiple false identities linked to his alias were traced to shell companies and offshore accounts, which were now frozen pending prosecution. Interpol had become involved, and though the process was slow, it moved forward. Every week brought new reports. New arrests. New confirmations that Daniel's trail had been not only thorough but devastatingly effective. Marianne had made sure Daniel's story, his real story, was preserved. She had met with a local journalist, someone she trusted, and worked with them to write a feature piece, not naming Caleb or delving into the confidential parts of the investigation, but highlighting Daniel's foresight, his silent battle to protect what mattered, and the systems he helped expose even in death. The article ran quietly in a Sunday paper, buried under more sensational headlines, but it was enough. It gave Daniel the closure she had once thought impossible. The money remained untouched. Aside from modest donations Marianne had made to organizations Daniel supported, local schools, a youth mentoring nonprofit, and a family-run veterans assistance program, she had chosen to let the wealth grow. She didn't need it to live. She lived simply, by choice now more than necessity. But knowing it was there, guarded and intact, gave her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. She had also started writing again. Nothing for publication. Just thoughts. Memories. Observations. She filled one journal after another, not with stories of the past but reflections on what had been saved, what had been lost, and what might yet be rebuilt. One afternoon in late March, as she watered the garden, Caleb approached her from the side gate. He looked different, not only older but grounded. He was wearing plain jeans, work boots stained with dirt, and a t-shirt from the construction apprenticeship program he had joined 2 months earlier. "I got the official letter," he said, handing it to her. "Diversion complete. No further action." She read it, nodded, then folded it gently and handed it back. "I'm proud of you," she said. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "I've been thinking about the account. The one Dad left." She tensed slightly. "I'm not ready for it," he said quickly. "I don't think I will be for a while. I just wanted you to know, I haven't forgotten it. I don't want it to be a reward." Marianne blinked once, then slowly smiled. "That's the first time you've ever said something like that." Caleb nodded. "I've been saying a lot of new things lately." They worked in the garden for a while without speaking. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer strained. It was shared. Later that evening, Marianne opened the drawer beside her bed and took out the velvet box. The Rolex still gleamed, untouched by time. She held it in her hand for several minutes, running her thumb over the scratch in the clasp. The tiny flaw Daniel had never fixed. Proof, as he used to say, that nothing perfect ever lasts, but some things could endure, even with their scars. She returned it to the box and placed it on her nightstand. That same night, she sat down at her desk and wrote the final page of her latest journal. This wasn't about money. It was never about the watch. It was about memory, legacy, and the quiet strength it takes to let someone fall so they can learn how to stand again. Daniel knew the weight of that choice. Now I do too. We protected what mattered. Not just the assets. Not just the name. But the integrity of something deeper. And in doing so, we gave it a future. This is what remains when the noise settles, a home rebuilt, a son finding his footing, a man's quiet love echoing through the spaces he once filled. And a timepiece, still ticking, not as a symbol of what was lost, but of everything we refused to let go. She signed the page. Closed the journal. And finally, turned out the light. The story was not about what had been hidden. It was about what had been saved.